For decades, the executive luxury default answer has been the S-Class. Genesis looks at that formula, looks at the price, and basically asks, how much of this is engineering and how much is just a badge tax? They bolted an electric supercharger to their twin-turbo V6 to move 5,200 pounds of mass, but isolating the cabin from the road requires more than just an air suspension. The instant response of the electric supercharger fills in any kind of torque gap before those turbos wake up, and there is no discernible lag. That's important here because 409 horsepower is only adequate when you're asking 5,200 pounds to move. From 1,500 to 4,000 RPM, it is effortless. There's no drama, there's no extra surge in torque, and it's so convincing this doesn't even need to give you an explanation. At higher speeds, above 4,500 RPM, that illusion starts to fade. It's then that this reminds you it's a heavy flagship, not a 12-cylinder limousine. The engineering achievement here isn't exuberance, it's making complicated boost management disappear for the person who wrote the check. In comfort mode and under light throttle, the gearbox will hunt for the tallest ratio to try to preserve some semblance of fuel economy. Plus, its kickdown response is entirely dependent on which drive mode you've selected. And in comfort mode, as we're in now, that kickdown takes a beat long enough for you to consider whether passing that poorly driven Tesla is still emotionally necessary. In sport, the response wraps up as if it remembers that the brochure said dynamic and it's trying to defend the honor of that PDF. The all-wheel drive system's torque split definitely feels rear drive biased, which is a good thing, and you only start feeling that torque distribution when you start driving this like a sports sedan. Loaded in a corner, picking up the throttle, there's a very subtle, brief hesitation as the system tries to determine how you expect the torque to split front to rear. It's like there's a conversation going on between the axles that you weren't invited to. If you're hustling this through some corners on some wet pavement, that's what you should expect, but on dry pavement, the system distributes torque transparently. Think about it this way. The Drivetrain is less action blockbuster and more prestige drama. Expensive, controlled, and occasionally reminding you the pacing is deliberate on purpose. This G90's acceleration is old money. It doesn't need to make a scene and frankly finds the whole idea vulgar. This is decidedly not a muscle sedan. It's a boardroom on 21s with a good exit strategy. Subscribers get notified of new episodes, everybody else leaves it to the algorithm. And if you want to get notified when new episodes drop on this channel, well, that's what the subscribe button does. This segment is sponsored by Go Clean. Full disclosure, moving on. This is their waterless car wash. Canadian, eco-friendly, and no water required. I keep it in my kit because press cars don't stay clean and I hate wasting time on avoidable problems. A couple of minutes and the car is ready. It also smells fantastic, which was not something I was expecting in a car wash product, but here we are. That's Video Clean. Use code MAX15 for 15% off. When it comes to steering, Genesis got the brief correct here. Steering is strong on center, especially at highway speeds, and it's definitely welcome there. When the surface changes, however, there's just enough feedback through the chassis to let you know what's going on, but without that turning into a long, drawn-out conversation you don't want to be part of. At lower speeds, it lightens appropriately, and then, of course, it's assisted by the rear steer, making this big G90 incredibly maneuverable. Getting into the tightest of downtown parking garage spots are not a challenge for this G90. And what's also interesting is places where you'd normally have to make a three-point turn, this thing can make a U-turn and call it a day. And you know that four-wheel steering is not unique to the segment, that's for sure, but it's very well executed here. It makes this G90 much more usable, but it doesn't have the liveliness of a sports sedan. Brakes are strong and powerful, and you've got a lot of confidence in this brake pedal, but the brake pedal itself is tuned more for the rear passenger than the driver themselves. Initial application of that brake pedal is soft, and what it allows you to do is control those slow decelerations very smoothly so you don't upset your rear passenger. But when you get into the middle of the pedal, well, the pedal firms up and tells you the braking system means business. If you do need to stop this in a hurry with maximum braking, this stops in a hurry. There's very little intrusion from the ABS system into the cabin and very little pulsation that you'll feel in the brake pedal. This suspension with its air springs and road preview is the headline dynamic technology in the G90. It glides over broken pavement, and you'd think that the low-profile 21-inch wheel and tire package would be a little harsh, but that's not the case here. The ride is beautifully controlled on compression, a little less so on rebound, and body roll is ever present. When the corners get interesting, this G90 is cohesive enough and responsive enough, but it's fun in the same way seeing a career politician order wings is fun. Seriously, though, I wouldn't call this playful handling. It's executive handling. It corners the way a CEO apologizes, controlled, measured, and with support staff. But make no mistake, when you put this in sport mode, it's not like the G90 turns into a much smaller sedan with worse judgment. If you want to support the channel beyond just watching, well, the merch store is open, and your support there means more time for us to produce episodes like this and a little less reliance on industry access. No pressure, just an option. The seating position is wonderful. Puts you low in the chassis, far enough back from the windscreen, which is great from my perspective, but not so great when you're trying to judge where all four corners are. In sport mode, the bolsters firm up and hug you a little bit, as if this Genesis is preparing you for something that this 5,200-pound executive sedan actually discourages you to do. Forward visibility is excellent. Rearward visibility a little bit less so, but this does have 360-degree cameras, and those feel less like a convenience and more like standard operating procedure. The infotainment system is excellent. It's very easy to deal with, but it's not that memorable. What is a challenge in this cabin, however, is the climate control system. Here, the basic temperature adjustment is a simple toggle, but everything else is in this touch-based screen, which actually requires some visual confirmation to ensure you've done it right. If you're on the move, that does mean you have to take your eyes off the road. On the other hand, this rotary shift dial is one of the best executions of this concept, and on top of that, anytime you're shifting this, it actually feels like jewelry in your hand. It's compact, it's intuitive, has a nice weight to it, and the general feel is much better than most electronic shifters out there. This interior is gorgeous. Everywhere you look, there are interesting materials, interesting finishes, and this G90 is finished at a level that no Genesis was 5 years ago. If I remember correctly, Genesis is moving to Bang & Olufsen across the board. The speaker grills are premium. The little tweeters that come out of the top of the dash, they are all stunning and absolutely suited to the interior of this G90. There is a lot of tech on board here, most of it useful, all of it usable, and none of it gets in the way of the act of driving. In terms of spaciousness, this is Genesis's largest sedan, so space is in abundance even in that second row, and I did spend some time as a passenger in the second row, and it's a lovely place to be. My only complaint is when I've got that seat a little bit reclined, the seat cushion's a little too high off the floor. I'd actually like to be sitting a little lower as that second row passenger. There is a little less space in the trunk of this G90 Black than the regular G90, and apparently that's due to the 48-volt system, but it is still voluminous. It'll still fit 2 full-size suitcases and definitely 2 or 3 full-size golf bags. Seat memory will save all of your important driving settings, and that's great. The one thing it does not save is your drive mode. What that means is every time you restart your G90, it defaults to comfort mode. On the other hand, park hold persists across ignition cycles. So the car remembers to hold itself at a stoplight, but forgets how you drive. Priorities. I have to mention that in this black, massaging seats are in all 4 places, and these are some of my favorite massaging seats I have ever experienced. If this episode gave you something you didn't get from a brochure, hit like. It tells YouTube to share this episode with more people like you interested in an episode like this. Takes just a second. That's what the G90 told me after a week behind the wheel, but the people who actually write checks for these things have something to say, and it has nothing to do with horsepower. The feature owners bring up most after 6 months isn't the air suspension, not the Bang & Olufsen sound system, or the massaging seats. It's the power closed doors. The kind of luxury gimmick people mock until they live with it for a week and start wondering why every other car suddenly feels cheap. I don't disagree, this is a pretty cool feature. What owners notice that press launches never capture is the paradox built into the cabin itself. The acoustic laminated glass and sound deadening are so effective that they raise the standard for everything else. So minor rattles that would disappear in a noisier car suddenly feel unacceptable here. And don't get them wrong, they're not complaining that the G90 is loud, they're noticing it's quiet enough to expose anything imperfect. They also say that the app ecosystem is a point of friction. Owners report remote start failures, climate commands that claim success when the car never responded, and occasional connectivity dropouts. The hardware feels like a flagship, the digital layer not so much. And here's a number that every prospective buyer needs to hear. American owners and market data consistently show 50% depreciation within 3 years. A 2023 G90 that's stickered at $100,000 is trading in the low 50s today with under 40,000 miles. And as many have said, the G90 might be the best argument in luxury sedans, but only if you let someone else buy it first. That's the ownership reality, and most importantly, G90 owners are consistently reporting that they love their big Genesis luxury sedans. If you own one of these or have some quality seat time in one of these, let me know in the comments what I got right and what I got wrong, because real-world owner experiences are much more valuable than a week-long press loan, and I always read those comments. Here's the thing, the G90 Black stops making sense when you treat it like a sports sedan. It's too heavy, too isolated, and too fundamentally committed to comfort for that friction to survive very long. But judged by its actual job, moving a human being from one place to another without the road intruding on the experience, it makes a serious case against the traditional German default. On ride isolation, cabin refinement, equipment per dollar, there isn't much daylight here. The G90 buyer is the person who looked at the S-Class price, looked at the feature sheet, and then realized they were paying for a badge and 40 years of marketing. This is a car for someone who wants the experience without the audience, and there's a quietly growing market for people who would rather their neighbors not know exactly how much car is parked in the driveway. Genesis built a $100,000 car that answers the same questions a comparably equipped S-Class does, except that Mercedes costs tens of thousands of dollars more. If you want driving engagement, buy a G70. You'll be happy. If your priority is arriving without the road being the dominant part of the conversation on your journey, this G90 is the most competent argument in the Genesis lineup. This G90 illustrates that the German premium is just that, a premium. Not a quality advantage, not an engineering advantage, a tax for the badge. The S-Class wins the cultural argument, but this G90 is here to ruin the financial one. That's the Genesis G90. Subscribe if you want to see more of these. Don't if you don't. Comments are open if you disagree, and the merch store is open if you want to help fund more of these. See you on the next one.